Part 7. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 61. Although the topic revolved around the Vulpix, Shirley, the master, did not play much of a role in it. Mainly, Xiu and Yudo kept throwing out their opinions, denying or complimenting each other. Eevee's main means of attack is his body, and Vulpix's most powerful ability lies in fire skills. If he fights with his body, Vulpix has no chance of winning. If he wants to win, he must develop the abilities that Vulpix should have. Shirley's command was also a problem. Xiu had learned about her previous battles in detail, and this guy knew how to let Vulpix rush forward. With the efforts of him and Yudo, a somewhat crude cultivation plan came out. Why do you suddenly think of studying? You even gave me your homework before. Yudo was a little surprised. He had only been out for a while, so why did his sister suddenly become studious? Did something happen? Yudo looked at Shirley with a serious tone. It's a good thing to want to learn, Xiu said with a smile, looked at Shirley and added, people change. Shirley realized something when she saw Xiu's eyes, picked up Vulpix and stroked its big tail. Before, it was you who refused to teach me that made my grades so bad. Now that you are willing to teach me, you won't let me learn. When Yudo heard his sister's familiar excuse, his feelings suddenly changed and returned. He smiled and teased, let Xiu teach you, I'm going to prepare dinner. After saying that, Yudo stood up, ignoring the Coddy dog playing with the little lucky egg beside him. Seeing Yudo leave, Shirley asked Xiu, why can't you tell him? You yourself said that your brother is very familiar with that person. What if he tells the truth and that person is prepared? Xiu seemed very casual, and then added something. You study hard here, I will help you design a training plan and teach you how to train Vulpix. How long will it take? Xiu glanced at her when he heard this, do you want to win? Think. Then just listen to me. Xiu didn't mean to talk nonsense to her. I need to see her fighting ability with my own eyes. What can you do? The school will organize a battle at the Elf Center on the weekends. You can see it then. Understood. Xiu, come with me. After Baoba finished eating, he called Shangxiu, went deep into the corridor next to the living room, and then came to a unique room. Xiu followed and walked in, and found that this room occupied an area of at least 2 offices, and the furnishings inside also highlighted its unique function. This is my studio. I have prepared the required materials. I will teach you how to prepare the potion later. Baoba said, taking out the elf ball and releasing Hude. But before that, let your Casey and Hude learn meditation and learn to control superpowers. Xiu heard the words and without any hesitation, he released Casey from the elf ball with his backhand. Telepathy connected, and Xiu had completed the communication with Casey in just a few seconds. And Casey had no objection to this, and the look he looked at Hude no longer had the hostility before. Go ahead. As soon as he finished speaking, Hude and Casey disappeared from sight at the same time. Baoba noticed Xiu's expression and comforted him casually, it's okay, Hude will take care of it. Let's prepare the medicine first. This is about your life. Baoba can become the person who presides over the assessment of cultivators, and he started as a cultivator, so his related abilities are naturally top-notch. It is even easier to prepare a medicine for this aspect. But now it's not him who needs it, but Xiu. All he had to do was teach Xiu how to read the prescriptions, and then prepare the medicines alone. Xiu is not an idiot. The most difficult prescription is already available. Just prepare it according to the above proportions and methods. It didn't take long for Xiu to pick up a test tube from the machine. Is this considered a success? Baoba reached out and took it, sniffed it, and then shook it gently. It should be no problem, just try it. After saying that, he handed the test tube back to Xiu's hand. Should we not check it again? Xiu looked at the pale green liquid filled with bubbles in the test tube and frowned. This is medicine after all, so there won't be any problems. It's okay, you have to believe me. Baoba didn't seem too concerned when he heard this, and Xiu was relieved to see him like this. But Baoba's next words almost scared him. Even if something goes wrong, I will save you. Xiu's expression froze when he heard this, and the hand holding the test tube trembled slightly. After Baoba saw Xiu like this, he smiled and patted his shoulder and joked, I really thought you weren't afraid of death. There is no point in unnecessary sacrifice. After Xiu finished speaking, he opened his mouth to suffocate the potion in one gulp, and then smacked it in his mouth, as if he was savoring it carefully. Bitter and a bit spicy. How is it? Do you feel anything special? The smile on Baoba's face never stopped. Xiu felt the condition of his body for a while, shook his head and said, No. That's right. Baoba turned around and started to collect the materials. It really feels like something is wrong. I'm going to send you to the hospital for gastric lavage. When Xiu heard Baoba's words, he realized that he was full of bad taste. By the way, what are you and Shirley doing? How come she has become a different person, actually starting to care about Vulpix's training, and even asked me to help her prepare new rations? Hearing this, Xiu briefly told what happened before. That little girl named Chanel bullies your granddaughter all day long, and the headmaster doesn't care? Or does the headmaster not see it? Having been fooled just now, Xiu also teased Baoba, who knew that Baoba didn't seem to take it seriously after hearing it, but smiled and asked back, then what do you want me to do? Go to her house to complain or beat her up and then cut off relations? Hearing this, Xiu also fell silent. I know who Chanel is. No matter how well she pretends in front of us, her perverse personality can't be hidden, but before things get out of hand, we can't interfere in the affairs of the younger generation. And in the same situation, Shirley suffered because she was not motivated, and she can't blame others. Xiu can be heard that Baoba is fully aware of the tricks here, but it's not easy to intervene. As for Shirley, she was a lazy person all day long and didn't even do her homework, so it was normal for her to be beaten and ridiculed. But has the headmaster ever thought about why Shirley is not close to you and Yuto? When Xiu said this, it was Baoba who was stunned. Xiu added another sentence. When she was in trouble, the headmaster was concerned about his face and didn't help her. It's hard for her to recognize you as her grandfather. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 62. Yudo couldn't see clearly what the girl was doing, and he was fooled around. When he encountered problems, he blamed it on his sister's ignorance. The resources mentioned by the principal are the same, but even more different. Regarding the cultivation of elves, there are dedicated training staff and individual tutoring by teachers. Everything from food to training is arranged for the elves. But what about Shirley? You are busy with work and don't have much time at home a day, and Yuto is busy with his own affairs and has no time to care about her. Before Xiu could finish speaking, Baoba raised his hand to interrupt him and sighed. Alas, I didn't care much about Yuto back then, hasn't he grown up now? Xiu curled his lips when he heard this, and the expression on his face became serious. But the principal didn't consider that people are different. Although they are brothers and sisters, their personalities are different. Besides, I can guarantee that no one would suppress Yuto at that time. And what about Shirley? I have been bullied since I was a child. Xiu saw that Baoba didn't speak and fell silent. He also knew that his words were a bit excessive, but he had no intention of stopping. Instead, he continued to add. Both you and Yuto love and protect Shirley, but there's something wrong with your methods. She went to her brother with her homework, but Yuto thought she was too lazy to do it and just finished it for her. Maybe she just wanted someone to tutor her? And the principal, you said that it is difficult to communicate with Shirley, and you even talk very little. But as I said just now, Shirley asked you for Vulpix's rations. Why don't you take this opportunity to enhance communication by teaching her how to make rations? What she may need is not the food ration, but your attention. Baoba groaned, his expression introverted, as if he was thinking about something. And I feel that although Shirley is in this home, she is actually separated from the two of you. The only one who can give her comfort or understand her is probably Vulpix. Maybe you're right. I didn't pay much attention to these things before. Baoba's expression stabilized. Apparently he had figured something out. He turned to Xiu and asked, "But how could you see that, of? Maybe it's because I was often bullied before." Xiu curled his lips, his face looking very casual. However, Baoba frowned slightly after hearing this. Before Baoba could say anything, Xiu smiled and explained. "I chatted with Shirley for a while today. Although she revealed a little resentment towards you in her words, it was not strong. As long as you communicate more, everything will be fine soon. Children are always coaxed." Baoba nodded in agreement and said casually, "I understand, I will talk to Yuto." "No, no, no," Xiu became excited when he heard this, raising his hands and waving wildly. When Baobaba saw this, he was a little surprised and asked, "What's wrong? Wouldn't it be better for Yuto to pay more attention to her?" Xiu smiled bitterly and explained, "Director, it's not like you don't know Yuto's character. As soon as you tell him, he dares to go to Shirley for a showdown. Children also need to save face, and Shirley has a sensitive and fragile personality. When Yuto takes off her fig leaf, what do you think Shirley's reaction will be? What's more, Yuto will go to confront Kana, and he will probably expose the principal. If the family members on the other side hear this, the principal will be very embarrassed." "That's right, I didn't expect this." Baoba felt right after hearing what Xiu said. "But I have a plan that can not only help Yuto see through Kana's true face, but also make him care more about Shirley." "Oh, elaborate." "Now I have made an agreement with Shirley." Xiu roughly explained the arrangement, but Baoba seemed a little hesitant after hearing it. It's hard for me to explain. Unable to recognize people is also one of Yuto's weaknesses. Let's reveal Kana's true face and teach him a lesson, which can also be regarded as training. And Shirley can not only avenge the grudges accumulated over the years, but also create a rival to give her motivation to study, and her grades will get better. What's more important is that you can repair your previous relationship. Wouldn't this plan kill 3 birds with 1 stone? As for the consequences, as you said, the matter is limited to the juniors, and you adults will be embarrassed to end it. When the time comes, I will ask Shirley to pretend to be miserable and lie on the bed for 2 days, then you will show off to the other side." "Still explain?" "They are coming to make amends." Xiu's words were astonishing, as if he didn't take the other person seriously at all. "I'm talking about Channa. She's a child. You wouldn't treat her like this, right? Does it mean you can let it go just because you are a child?" "Principal, don't forget that this child has been bullying your granddaughter." A sneer flashed across Xiu's face, and he said in a sinister tone, "It's only in her best interest to give her some pain. It will be even more troublesome if you mess with people you shouldn't mess with." Baoba may be a little slow about his family, but when it comes to external situations, he immediately becomes sensitive. Especially when he looked at the slight smile on Xiu's face, he noticed something. He grinned and said, "You are so good at killing people with a borrowed knife. It's unlucky for Kana to offend you." The expression on Xiu's face did not change, and he said calmly, "Am I that kind of person? What's more, Miss Chanel didn't offend me. This matter has nothing to do with the principal, and it has nothing to do with me at all. This is just a joke of a junior." "That's right, this is a matter between the younger generation, and it has nothing to do with us." Baoba also understood what Xiu said, nodded with a smile, and turned the topic away. Then let's talk about the salary issue for your tutoring, Shirley. After a while, Shiu came out of the studio, found Shirley who was watching TV in the living room, and said, "Come help me." "Huh? What?" Shirley looked at Shiu strangely. "I help you, and you also have to help me," Shiu smiled and explained, "You know I haven't been to school, I want you to teach me what you learned." Shirley heard this with a panic on her face, and her body couldn't help but lean on the sofa. "I can't do it, you go find grandpa or brother." "It's okay, I'll learn with you." "I really can't do it." Shiu looked at her with a very strange look, and soon Shirley lowered her head as if surrendering, and followed Shiu upstairs. "Where do you usually study?" Here Shirley's tone was still a little resentful. Seeing her like this, Shiu smiled and said, "If you help me, I will help you defeat her." Shiu followed Shirley to her room, which was decorated very ordinary and monotonous. "I thought there would be dolls or something." "I'm not so naive." Shiu's question was ridiculed by Shirley, but he didn't care and reiterated the topic. "Take out the textbooks you have used since childhood and teach me." "Ah!" Shirley wailed, and the whole room returned to silence. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 63. Get up, Shiu leaned against the door and raised his hand to knock lightly. After a while, a rustling sound came from the room, the door was opened, and a messy-haired head stuck out from the crack in the door, looking up at Shiu. "I'm so sleepy, can't you let me sleep for a while this weekend? You've only been holding on for 2 days and you can't hold it anymore." Shiu looked at her and smiled, and said in a strange tone, "Ouch, I'm going to lose to her." When Shirley heard this, her sleepy eyes suddenly opened, and after saying a word, she closed the door heavily. "Wait me a moment." Shiu continued to lean against the door, with an extra book in his hand. At this time, Yuto happened to come out of the room. When he saw Shiu standing, he said, "Are you up?" Shiu looked away from the book, glanced at the closed door, and said casually, "I'm changing clothes." "Only you can wake her up." "I usually don't wake her up when I go to school. I won't get up until the right time, which makes me often late." Just as he was complaining, the door suddenly opened. Shirley, with her hair tied up and wearing sportswear, came out. "What did you just say?" "No. Today, the weather is nice." Yudo was stunned for a moment, smiled awkwardly and walked away quickly. "He must be talking bad about me," Shirley said to herself, looking at Yudo's appearance. "Come on, you've wasted 5 minutes." Shiu ignored the cordial interaction between their siblings and turned around to follow them downstairs. On the grass in the backyard, Shiu released the flying mantis with his backhand, and then looked at Shirley. "The old rule is to release the Vulpix and go for a morning run to practice your physical fitness." Shirley threw the elf ball, and after Vulpix came out of it, it stretched out like a kitten, and its curled tail stood up and straightened out. "Follow me," Shiu shouted, and then he started running, and Flying Mantis naturally followed by Vulpix and Shirley. But Yuto had already taken the lead and started running in the backyard with the dog. They were okay and had the habit of doing morning exercises all year round, but Vulpix and Shirley didn't, so they fell behind after just a few laps. Vulpix was an elf no matter what. Although he was lagging behind, he could still follow, but Sherry was already walking slowly behind, like a salted fish. But Chiu didn't say much, as long as she was willing to move, at least she would perform better than the previous 2 days. After the morning exercise, Shiu left the team and called Shirley to the side to prepare rations for the elf. Morning exercise is basic training. It mainly consumes physical energy. The purpose is to exercise physical fitness and maintain the state of the elf. You should also pay attention to the breakfast that is proportioned to the elf. Xiu guided Shirley. With the preparations made in the past few days, Shirley was basically able to complete the food independently. What Xiu had to do now was to teach her how to change the proportions and contents of food according to the actual situation. After arranging breakfast here, Xiu stopped the morning training of Phaeton Mantis and Vulpix, and then explained the training plan later while eating. The work of Vulpix was also assigned to him. At this time, Shirley did not have the ability to independently design training content. Yuto also finished his morning exercise. He didn't even break out after such a simple activity and looked relaxed and casual. The KD dog is also full of energy, and the amount of exercise just now was just a warm-up. Where's Casey? Why haven't you seen me in the past 2 days? Kathy went to Huda for special training with the director, and I don't know when I will be back. Flying Mantis noticed something and turned to look at Xiu. Xiu, who was communicating with Yuto here, noticed it and just whispered to the Flying Mantis, "It's okay. By the way, I'm going to start Vulpix's fire ability training later. Please help me check it. After all, I'm just a theory and have never practiced it." Xiu is very aware that his abilities have limitations. Vulpix is not an elf that relies on its body to fight. Fire skills are its real strength. In this regard, he lacked practice and had no access to relevant resources. But Yuto is different. Although Kadi dog is physically strong, it must have a lot of experience in this area with the same fire element. I'm afraid this was one of the reasons why Bao chose Vulpix for Shirley. I thought Yuto could take care of his sister. It's just that he was just playing for himself. It just so happens that Grandpa doesn't have time to take me for training, so why don't we go to the river, where I usually train with Kadi dog? The principal will still take you for training. Yes, Grandpa will go to the reserve with me to train when he is free. The Latin American people there are very powerful. The words protected area and Lalami tribe made Xiu a little curious. He came back to his senses and asked, could it be the protected area next to the park? Yes, Xiu has been there too. No, Xiu slowly shook his head. Were you training with the principal before? I'm still a little curious about this, Xiu, and I don't know how Baoba trained Yuto. Freehand rock climbing, armed swimming, freehand tree climbing, free diving, emergency self-rescue, mountain running, jungle cross-country, etc. Yuto said calmly, as if there was nothing strange about it. Sometimes I also interact with the Latin American people. When fighting against those people, Tomiko's little fire horse is also very powerful. No. It's nothing. His words scared Xiu to the point where he didn't dare to speak. No wonder Yuto had a body as strong as a Kadi dog. It turned out that he had experienced Baoba's devilish training. People in this world are all sick, bringing an underage child to do such a thing, and Yuto looks calm, which means that this is not a very strange thing. You and Grolithe prepare first, I'll go make breakfast, and we'll leave after eating, Xiu said and walked into the house. Now he took over the cooking and some chores, which can be regarded as reducing Baoba's work and giving him more time to accompany Shirley and others. After all, he lives and eats here, and he has taken such a big advantage. Xiu himself would feel bad if he didn't do something. After finishing breakfast, the group led by Yuto headed towards the training site. Along the way, Xiu didn't waste time, and took the opportunity to express his ideas, and then communicated and discussed with the two of them to modify and complete the training method of Vulpix. I have to say that Yuto is really good at this aspect of Pokemon, worthy of being trained by Baobaba. Easily found the situation that Xiu didn't consider, and then gave his own ideas. But it also exposed a problem. This guy talked too much and didn't care about others at all. If Xiu hadn't intentionally or unintentionally dragged Shirley into the topic, she would probably be no different from a passerby. This villa area is in the southeast corner of Qianhong City. After Yuto led them for about half an hour, they arrived at a small river. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 64. I usually come here to practice my skills. It's open and there's water nearby, so I'm not afraid of problems. Xiu took a brief look at the surrounding situation. There was an artificial embankment on both sides of the river bank, and extending out was an open wasteland. There were no flammable materials, so he was not afraid of causing any trouble. At the same time, he also noticed traces of flames burning on the surrounding ground and river banks. The Katy dog who came here seemed very excited and was running around. The hair on its body was fluffy like never before, and sparks popped out of its mouth from time to time. "Come here," Yudo shouted, and Katy ran over. Yudo squatted half-crouched to catch the charging dog, put his hands on his neck and rubbed it vigorously, but the dog narrowed its eyes with enjoyment and rubbed sideways against him. "Okay. Show Siu your strength and use flame jet towards the sky." After saying that, Yudo patted the Katy dog on the head, and it rushed out, opening its mouth in the air. Not far away, Xiu watched as a pillar of fire as thick as an arm shot up into the sky from its mouth. The pillar of fire was so condensed that the air around it rippled, and billowing heat waves hit his face. This time it has a distance of 7 or 8 meters. It is still released upward. If it is laid flat, it may have a longer attack distance. With this lethality, Xiu could hardly imagine what would happen if it hit a person or an elf. The pillar of fire only lasted for 2 or 3 seconds and then dissipated into the air as the Katy dog shut up. But the feeling it brought to Xiu never dissipated for a long time. The elf is so magical. Well done. Yudo was also quite proud. After all, he was the dog he had cultivated along the way. Yudo was communicating with Katy dog, and Xiu also looked at Vulpix, who didn't know what was going on. A special training for Vulpix began. The key lies in brewing, mobilizing energy, and then transforming it into flames to spit out. Calling energy, that's not it? Katy dog, please show me. It starts in the throat, not outside. Xiu originally thought that he was the leader of the training, but he didn't expect that he would become a student like Shirley in this aspect. Yudo, on the other hand, has complete control over Vulpix's training and is currently training. At the same time, Xiu also figured out a little bit about the elf skills. Maybe I can ask Casey Flying Mantis and the others to study it when I go back. Chew. The long period of various inducements made Vulpix's nose itchy and he sneezed at will. But the difference from the past was that this time, for some reason, a few flames flew out along with the sneeze. When Yudo saw it, he was overjoyed. He looked at Shirley and shouted excitedly. "Come out! We finally succeeded!" The one who was more excited than Yudo was undoubtedly the Katy dog, which was jumping up and down, and the dog's head was swaying like a lion dance. Shirley also looked at this situation with some surprise. This was something she had never been exposed to before, and she felt a little fluttering in her heart for some reason. But at this time, Xiu on the side woke her up from the daze. "Okay, now it's your turn. Have you brought the food to replenish Vulpix's energy?" "Huh?" Shirley turned to look at Xiu before reacting. I brought it, I took it." Then he hurriedly took out the food and water he had prepared before, and then moved forward to feed Vulpix. Xiu did not urge or interfere, but silently watched the interaction between her and Vulpix. This kind of training lasted all morning, and Vulpix was finally able to breathe fire thanks to the efforts of their brothers and sisters. Although it only lasted for less than 2 seconds, it still made Shirley extremely happy. Anyway, Shirley was very different on the way back than when she came here, and she was chattering all the way. "Okay, I won't go with you this afternoon." Xiu's words immediately attracted their attention, especially Shirley, who looked directly at him. But Yudo asked openly. "What's wrong?" Xiu still had that same smile, and he said casually to Shirley, "Today is the weekend, I have some things to do and I have to go to the elf center. Yuto seemed normal, but Shirley understood the meaning of Xiu's words and looked thoughtful. Elf center. Xiu sat in front of the computer in the corner, looking through the emails Xiao Yuan left for him. The situation was even better than he imagined. After opening new channels, the revenue increased significantly. With strong financial support, she followed Xiu's requirements and printed books that were no longer limited to basic books, but also included more professional and non-elf books. The layout in other cities is gradually spreading, and second-hand stores in Jianhong City have already opened. Although the data looked good, Xiu thought the situation was not that simple and gave her a warning and some arrangements to buffer the risk. There are also some follow-up arrangements. Of course, the encouragement given to her is indispensable. Xiao Yuan must have contributed a lot to being able to achieve this point. Only she knows how difficult it is. After the matter here was settled, Xiu stood up and walked towards the battlefield next to him. He didn't forget one of the reasons for coming here today. I took a look when I came here before and saw that there weren't many people inside, and most of the people fighting on the field were adults, with few children. But today the situation is completely reversed. There are many people sitting in the audience, almost 2/3 of the seats. Most of the audience feel like a family. In the era of scarce entertainment activities, bringing family members to watch the battle on weekends is also a way of entertainment. The 3 battle venues on the field are all in battle, but the difference is that most of the trainers are children, and there are fewer adults. According to Shirley, on weekends, many students will gather together to the Pokemon Center to occupy seats and then fight. The school also encourages this kind of extracurricular practice, and even teachers will come to lead the team, and there will be some rewards for outstanding performance. Shirley participated twice at the beginning, but stopped going after being abused. Coming to the Pokemon Center to participate in the battle is a voluntary activity. Most of the people who come here are first and second grade students. As for seniors, they basically don't appear here. For example, Yuto spends most of his time cultivating his own Pokemon. On weekends, he will go to places like the reserve for high-intensity training to strive for better results in the upcoming graduation ceremony. Xiu scanned the circle and finally found Channa, who was surrounded by a group of people in the audience. At this moment, he was not in a hurry at all. He just found a secluded place to sit down and watched the battles. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 65. It is true that there are more people, but most of these students' Pokemon are young, and the battle is not interesting at all, just brutal melee. Even if Pokemon like the 3 starter Pokemon appear from time to time, there is nothing to see. The strength they show is not as oppressive as Yuto and Caterpie. Xiu roughly judged the strength of these students, then retracted his gaze and took out a book to read. Mosquito has lost its ability to fight, and the red team wins. As the referee waved the flag in his hand, a battle came to an end. The winner enjoyed the cheers of the audience, while the loser could only take back the Pokemon and go to the side to find Miss Joy for help. At this time, Channa finally stood up from the group of students and slowly walked into the arena. Her opponent was a boy who had been waiting for a long time. Xiu slowly moved his eyes away from the book and looked at the battlefield. At this time, both sides had taken their positions, and the Pokemon of both people also appeared on the field. Channa on the blue side, the Pokemon is Eevee. And the Pokemon of the red boy is Armstrong. Judging from the appearance alone, it is obvious that Armstrong has a big advantage with height, weight, and strong muscles. Of course, this is only one aspect, and Ibrahimovic also has the advantages of speed and flexibility. Fight! The referee raised his hands high, then swung the flag in his hand downward fiercely, drawing 2 arcs, and at the same time, the other 2 words burst out of his mouth. Start! Armstrong rush! As soon as the battle started, the boy took a step forward, leaned his whole body forward, and shouted at the elf. People who didn't know thought he wanted to rush forward by himself. Armstrong rushed towards Ibrahimovic without hesitation after receiving the order, and his speed was not very slow despite the height advantage. And facing the aggressive Armstrong, Chanel did not rush to give orders, but looked at Armstrong with a smile. Ibrahimovic, like its trainer, seemed particularly leisurely, with only his eyes staring at the opponent. Arm strength didn't care about their state, and faithfully followed the trainer's instructions. After rushing over, he opened his arms and showed a half-closed shape. When he exerted force, the muscles on his arms were clearly visible, and it was obvious that he had been trained. Obviously, he knew that Evie was more flexible than himself, so he wanted to expand his attack range and control his opponent. Whether it was in front or on the left or right, he was confident that he could catch his opponent. Now. Lightning flash. Kaname's confident voice appeared on the field, and the originally leisurely EV arched his back, and then lowered his body again in the next second. His hair exploded, showing the state of a hunter, and then rushed forward. It seemed that he had no intention of dodging arm strength at all, but instead delivered himself to the door. The distance between the two was only 2 or 3 meters. Arm strength subconsciously closed his arms to catch Evie, but it was a little short after all. Before closing, a stream of light broke in from under arm strength, and then went straight up and climbed on its body. Wrist strength felt as if he was being nailed with sharp steel nails, and these steel nails were still tearing his muscles. The intense pain immediately occupied his brain, causing him to change his original posture. He subconsciously reached for the painful part with both hands, but it was empty. But when his hands lost their balance, wrist strength felt something crawling up his face. Instantly, the sharp object scratched his face, and the pain surged into his brain again, but it was more painful than before. And Ibrahimovic jumped up from wrist strength's head, then landed steadily, with his back to wrist strength, and had no intention of taking his opponent seriously. And wrist strength was still covering his face and wailing, blood flowing from his hands, dripping on the ground at the joints, splashing a little blood. And his body was horrible, with scratches and tears of varying depths, and the bloodline seemed to weave a piece of clothing on him. Xiu frowned slightly when he saw this scene, and he didn't know when he had closed the book in his hand. Evie stood up and approached the armor from the bottom lane, then climbed along its body, dealt a heavy blow to its face, and finally landed. It sounds long, but in fact it only took 2 or 3 seconds. During the whole process, Evie was agile and smooth, and there was no sense of lag at all. And this Evie was ruthless, which was very different from the Pokémons that had played before. It can be seen that it has a very good control of its body and is very courageous. It is not frightened by the opponent's superficial advantages at all. Instead, it perfectly plays its advantages and hits the opponent hard with one blow. Such strength must have a lot of hard training behind it, and Shirley's Vulpix only learned to spray sparks today. The gap is a bit big. No wonder Vulpix seemed so weak when facing Eevee before. The battle is not over yet. Thanks to the strong vitality of the Pokémon, armor has temporarily recovered a little, and the face is also exposed. Just as Xiu guessed, there was a scratch that almost went across his face, and one of his eyes could no longer be opened, with obvious blood stains on his eyelid. "Do you want to fight again?" Channa smiled slightly, and her leisurely look clearly showed that she didn't take her opponent seriously. The boy looked at the wrist strength on the field, and his face showed obvious reluctance, but he also knew the gap between his strength and Channa's, and turned to the referee and said, "I give up." The referee didn't react much. He had seen this situation too many times. He raised the blue flag towards Channa and shouted at the same time, "The blue team wins." After defeating the enemy with one move, Channa waved to the back, and the students in the audience immediately cheered and applauded fiercely. It seems that this guy is actually quite popular. and Xiu only saw the boy's loneliness when he left the venue. Xiu shook his head and opened the book again. When it was evening, the students had left. Xiu put down the book in his hand and looked at the teacher who was still writing something. Just 2 seconds later, he stood up and left the Pokemon Center. Channa played a total of 3 games and won 2 games. Except for the first game, she was not able to easily defeat the enemy in the other 2 games. The game she lost was against Squirtle. In front of the turtle shell, Eevee's claws did not cause substantial damage. The opponent was also very experienced. He did not rush to counterattack, but kept luring Eevee to attack. When its physical strength was almost exhausted, it was directly shot out of the venue by the water gun. In this match, Eevee was restrained in some ways. But it can also be seen that these students who have undergone systematic learning also have good fighting ability. Known information is that it is agile and flexible, mainly uses claws as a way of attack, and sometimes bites with its mouth. The skills it can use are lightning flash and sand throwing. It is not ruled out that there are other skills that have not been used. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 66. Of course, there are also shortcomings. After all, he is still young and his body is not fully developed. Limited to his body, Ibrahimovic's attack ability and methods are actually not as strong as imagined. The 3 axes of scratching, biting, and hitting are gone after they are used up. Also, it has weak resistance to hits, and can cause considerable damage if hit. These problems may improve as Ibrahimovic grows, but now these are Xiu's research directions. By the time he returned to Baobaba's house, Yuto and Shirley had returned. Training is not hard for Xiu or Yuto, but for Shirley, who just started a few days ago, it is torture. Now I'm half slumped on the sofa watching TV like a salted fish. The Vulpix was similar to its trainer. It was also nestled next to Shirley, and even its tail lay lazily aside. Where's Yuto? Xiu walked over with a smile. He's back, Shirley said as if she was about to die. He went to train with Katie. After training, did you feed Vulpix to replenish energy as I told you, and then comb and massage it? Shirley remembered something when she heard this, and said hesitantly, this, I. Looking at her like this, Xiu knew that she must have forgotten, but he didn't say anything to her, he just reached out and picked up Vulpix. After getting along with each other for the past few days, Vulpix is not very resistant to Xiu, not to mention that it is too tired now and is too lazy to care about it, letting Xiu pick him up. Training is definitely tiring, but as a trainer, you have to know that you are not the only one who is tired. The elf is also tired after training, and at this time you have to take your own responsibility. As he spoke, Xiu took out some tree fruits and the nutritional paste he prepared, and while feeding Vulpix, he continued. The period after training is as important as the training process. Because reasonable food and relaxation methods can reduce the burden on the elf, both physically and mentally, and help the elf recover quickly. Xiu took out a short comb from somewhere and started to gently comb it along the Vulpix's hair. At the same time, this is also a great opportunity for the two of you to communicate with each other and cultivate a tacit understanding. This will involve the relationship between you and the elf, which is what those people often call the bond. Shirley listened to Xiu's words, then looked at his skillful movements and Vulpix's expression of enjoyment. She felt a little dazed for a moment, as if she was infected, and got up from the sofa and sat down. At this time, Vulpix felt Shirley's gaze, stood up and stretched, then turned sideways and rubbed his cheek against Shirley's arm. Xiu smiled and handed over the comb. Then it's time for our trainer to take action. Shirley subconsciously took the comb, then held Vulpix in her arms with one hand, and imitated Xiu's previous actions to comb Vulpix's hair. Seeing her serious look, Xiu couldn't help but chuckle, picked up a blue orange and handed it over. You should also eat some. This is very good for physical recovery. Shirley looked at Xiu stunned for a moment, then leaned forward and bit off the blue orange from Xiu's hand. Xiaoya didn't say anything more, with a faint smile on his face. However, Shirley avoided Xiu's side for some reason and lowered her head to comb Vulpix. It's just that this kind of peace didn't last long before Xiu opened his mouth and broke it. According to the information you provided, I watched 3 of that girl's battles at the Elf Center. Shirley's face gradually turned ugly as she listened to Xiu's description. Is the gap really that big? Xiu couldn't help but joked after hearing Shirley's question. You were sleeping while they were training, so there must be a big gap. Hearing these words, Shirley wanted to refute, but she couldn't, so she could only pretend not to hear. Haha, Xiu chuckled and said, but she is not invincible. As long as you are willing to do what I say, there will be a way. Really? Shirley looked up at him, her eyes full of desire for victory. Of course the smile on Xiu's face remained unchanged, and he took out a book. It's just not now. Your rest time is up today, it's time to study. Shirley's expression immediately fell, but she didn't refuse. In the backyard, Xiu was playing with the prop in his hand, which was a simple slingshot made from a tree branch. Shirley was watching from the side with some concern. Is this thing really not going to hurt Vulpix? If Vulpix doesn't have the ability to dodge faster, it will definitely not be able to defeat Eevee. This event is a must, and I can control the force. It will hurt when I hit it? It won't hurt it? If you don't believe it, look at it. As he spoke, Xiu pulled up his slingshot and fired a shot at the flying mantis not far away. Shirley, who was at a close distance, immediately heard the sound of breaking through the air. The flying mantis who was doing basic exercises seemed to have noticed something. He suddenly turned around and moved around, easily avoiding the flying pebble, and then looked over in the direction of the attack. Xiu nodded towards it, then turned towards Shirley and said, "Look, it's okay." It was just that Shirley rolled her eyes when she heard what he said. She saw that the stone penetrated directly into the ground and disappeared completely. How powerful is this? She knew the strength of flying mantis. Normal training was much more violent than this, so she could naturally react to it. But his Vulpix had just started training for a few days, how could he endure it? Can't we try another way? Don't be afraid, I've prepared. Xiu took out a fist-sized elastic ball. Use this to hit Vulpix first, and then use this after you get used to it. Why didn't you take it out earlier? Shirley was a little surprised to see this. Because I just took this out, you must have asked me to change it again. Xiu stuffed the ball into Shirley's hand. Practice well, otherwise the time you freed up by skipping classes will be wasted. Then he waved his hand and walked towards Scyther. After training these days, Xiu has figured out Shirley's personality. And Shirley looked at the ball in her hand and couldn't react for a while. But she soon understood what Xiu was saying, and when she looked up, Xiu was only left with his back. Although he wanted to hit the ball in his hand, he finally held back, turned his head and looked down at Vulpix beside him, and said seriously, "Come on, let's start training, we must prove it to that guy." Vulpix screamed softly, then rushed out and stopped 7 or 8 meters away. Shirley also started to get serious and threw the ball in her hand with force. However, both the accuracy and the force were a little far. Come again, Shirley didn't have much emotion, and threw it again after picking up the ball. Xiu didn't pay too much attention to what was happening over there, as he also had his own elves to take care of. How is it? Did you feel that energy? Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 67. Spy Mantis moved its limbs, and suddenly the aura around it gathered. A white light emanated from the inside out, and then soared in an instant, forming a cyan-like aura, but it quickly subsided. and Spy Mantis's entire expression and posture had an inexplicable change. It was as if it was more energetic. No, it should be more like a sharp sword. Is this the effect of gathering chi? Xiu couldn't help but sigh as he watched its changes. Since listening to Yadu's understanding of the skills of the Pokemon that day, Xiu roughly understood that the so-called skills are nothing more than mobilizing the energy in the Pokemon's body and acting on different situations. Then he studied with Spy Mantis for a few days and finally helped it find the energy in its body. And when this power acts on itself, the effect of gathering chi appears. Come, let's practice. Xiu picked up a long branch and chopped it at it without saying a word. Scythe's eyes condensed, and it retreated to avoid the first attack, then flapped its wings and rushed forward, with a pair of mantis blades crossed. If he was really hit by this move, Xiu would probably be cut in half. But Xiu had been practicing with Scythe for so long, why didn't he guard against this move? The branch he swung out turned downward and hit the angle of the sickle directly, causing Scythe's attack to be blocked and paused for a moment. He also took this opportunity to retreat, and the original branch was also retracted from the downward slash to the front of his body, and then stabbed Scythe straight out. Scythe changed its previous open and close attack, turned its head and half squatted to avoid Xiu's stab, and its whole body tilted with this change, almost falling. But at this time, the thin wings behind Scythe spread out, and then vibrated at high speed, and actually pushed it up. And the sickle was still raised, slashing towards Xiu's side. Come, Xiu shouted at the sight, still with a casual smile on his face, but the branch in his hand had already stopped at his side, stuck at the joint of the sickle and the hand, preventing it from closing. Xiu's foot had already kicked out at this time, kicking towards the abdomen of Scythe. Xiu was familiar with Scythe, and Scythe was also familiar with Xiu's rhythm. The sickle with the block joint simply gave up chopping and pulled back hard. The branch was pulled suddenly, also affecting Xiu, and his balance was destroyed. Xiu's kick also lost its original accuracy and stepped directly into the air. Scythe took this opportunity to stand up again. Come again, Xiu actually picked up the branch and charged towards Scythe this time. The two guys soon got entangled. Shirley, who was not far away, couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion when she saw this scene. Although it was not the first time she saw it, this training method was really shocking. Although she didn't train much before because of some things, she had learned it in the school system after all. But she had never seen a trainer who would participate in the training of his Pokemon like this. He could get hurt if he wasn't careful, but Xiu seemed to be very happy. He's just a lunatic, Shirley murmured, and then turned her attention back to her training with Vulpix. The training continued, but Xiu changed several sets of training content, but Shirley still used the same set. Vulpix didn't get any other training, but picking up the ball back and forth did improve his physical fitness. It wasn't until there was a noise at the front door that Xiu stopped his research with Scyther. He looked up at the sky and realized that a day had passed. He looked back and saw Yato and Growly walking in. But today, the two of them didn't have the vigor and vitality they had before, and instead looked dejected, as if they had encountered something bad. When Xiu saw Yato like this, he immediately realized that it must be Baoba who did it. Why did you come so late today? Nothing. Yato's face flashed a hint of hesitation when he heard this, but he didn't say it after all, just casually said it. But even Shirley could see that something was wrong with him, and turned around and asked with concern. Are you feeling uncomfortable? Are you sick? Nothing, just a little tired. Yato waved his hand, walked to the tree next to him and sat down, leaning on it. And the Caterpie also huddled beside him. Seeing this, Xiu said a few words to Shirley, then turned and walked towards the house. Yato looked at the approaching footsteps, subconsciously looked up, and saw his sister standing in front of him with a worried look on her face. I didn't. Yato was about to say something, but was interrupted by a sudden voice. When he looked towards the source of the voice, he saw Xiu walking towards the side, and something also slipped out of his hand. Here. Yadu subconsciously took the object and found it was a bottle of drink. It felt cold, obviously it was just taken out of the refrigerator. Looking up again, he still saw the familiar smile. Yadu didn't know why the pressure in his heart suddenly eased a lot, and a smile appeared on his face. It was just a bit forced. Summer evenings should be served with such cold drinks. Xiu handed a bottle to Shirley, then sat next to Yadu and talked to himself. Seeing this, Shirley also sat on the other side, opened the drink in her hand, took a sip directly, and then the whole person was like a salted fish. Obviously, it must be very hard to train with Xiu for a day. But after Xiu finished speaking, no one spoke, and the atmosphere on the field seemed a little awkward. Xiu glanced at Shirley, and seeing her like this, he knew that he couldn't count on her, so he could only speak for himself. Are you in trouble? Some things may feel better if you say them out. Shirley also noticed that Xiu glanced at her, and then she remembered Xiu's instructions just now, but she had missed it just now, so she could only follow Xiu's words. Yes, just say anything. Yadu glanced at the two of them, his lips moved slightly, but he didn't speak for a long time, and then sighed and said, I'm really fine, I'm just a little tired today. I'm fine. Xiu didn't mean to ask any more questions, twisted the drink and raised it towards Yadu. If you need help, just say it. After saying that, he took a sip, and his whole expression relaxed. As if infected by the leisurely atmosphere, Yadu also twisted the cap and took a sip. The sweet and sour drink with a little coolness reverberated in the mouth and slid down the throat. Yadu only felt a coolness radiating from the inside out, temporarily dispelling those troubles. What is your dream? Yadu seemed to let go of something and looked at the two of them. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 68. When Xiu heard this, although he didn't have much of a reaction on the surface, his heart felt a little thumped. Could it be that the director of the school got too big and hit Yadu so hard that even his ideals changed? The more Xiu thought about it, the more he felt that this was a possibility. After all, he knew from those training programs that Bao and Yadu were training at the risk of death. What if he overestimated his grandson's endurance and accidentally lost it? But Yadu refused to speak. Who knows what happened? But it seems that he himself is the culprit. After all, he was the one who suggested and provided the plan. Xiu's brain was spinning rapidly in a short period of time, and the muscles on his face could not help but twitch. Xiu was thinking wildly here, but it was Shirley who took over the conversation. Dream, Shirley gritted her teeth and said, my dream is to become a super trainer and defeat everyone who dislikes me. After saying that, she turned to look at Xiu and asked eagerly, by the way, Xiu, what is your dream? Shirley's words reminded Xiu, and he broke away from the state just now. My dream. Xiu paused for 2 seconds, then said with a smile, my ideal is to live in this world and then see the world. What a strange dream. Shirley shook her head and murmured in a low voice after hearing this. Xiu ignored the heartless Shirley and turned to Yadu and asked, what about you, Yadu? Yadu stuck his hands on it, holding the bottle in one hand, raising his head slightly and looking at the sky, and then said to himself, I originally thought my dream was to collect badges in different cities after graduation, participate in league competitions, and then come back and become a juncha like my grandfather to maintain world peace and stability. For this, Kadi Dog and I worked hard non-stop. We completed all the subjects when we were 10 years old and devoted ourselves to the trainer's courses until we became the first in the grade. The tone was very normal at first, but suddenly it took a turn for the worse. But now I find that I actually don't like fighting as much as I thought, nor do I have the will to pursue victory in the Alliance Conference, and I don't even know Juncha very well. The most important thing is that I am not as strong as I think I am. I can't even. Seeing that something was wrong with him, Xiu quickly interrupted him. No one stipulates that a person's dream cannot be changed. Dreams will continue to change with people's experiences. When I was in the orphanage, my dream was to have a full meal and then sleep peacefully. But now, do I still have to keep my previous thoughts? Compared to my environment at the time. Xiu is very clear about the reasons for such children's mood swings. No matter how smart he is, his three views still need to be built with time and experience, and at this time, their psychology is actually very fragile. As long as he comes up with similar but worse experiences, he can mobilize his empathy and pull him out of his own predicament. And Xiu's words really worked. After listening to his experience, the pessimistic expression on Yuto's face slowly faded, and he gradually showed sympathy. Even Shirley, a heartless person, couldn't help but feel sympathy when she heard Xiu's description of her experience in the orphanage. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. But for Xiu, this experience was just a means. He stopped when it was enough and turned to comfort him. What's more, Yuto, you're not bad as a trainer, at least better than most of your peers. I don't need to tell you what your grades are in school, right? You've done well enough. Yet it's just. Yuto still couldn't seem to get out. You have to understand, how old are you now? You have a lot of time to try, and you will know what you want. After saying that, Xiu looked at Shirley and teased, look, Shirley has started learning and training now, what are you worried about? Shirley was stunned for a moment when she heard this, and turned to glare at Xiu, but she also knew that her brother seemed to have encountered some problem, so she could only giggle in agreement. Yes, don't forget that you are number 1 in the 3rd grade in school. I made you worry. I'm fine now. Yuto knew that the two of them were worried about him, so he nodded towards them. As long as it's okay. Xiu raised his hand and patted Yuto's shoulder. If you have any trouble, remember to speak up. Let's work together to find a solution. We are all by your side. Yuto nodded. Finally a smile appeared on his face. Director, is there something wrong with Yuto? The repairman in the studio asked Baoba while skillfully preparing the potion. Baoba was obviously not in a good mood at this time. After hearing Xiu's words, he just nodded and had no intention of explaining. This look made Xiu feel uneasy. Fortunately, Baoba seemed to have noticed Xiu's situation and casually began to explain. There's nothing wrong with this, and the effect is even very obvious, but I didn't expect Yuto to be so fragile. Xiu listened to Baoba's words and asked tentatively, are you taking action? No, Yuto accidentally broke something and an elf died in his hands. Hey, Xiu Zhen was dumbfounded, but he quickly reacted and asked, is there something wrong with that shop owner? That shopkeeper is not clean. Baoba didn't care about the work at hand. After putting it down, he turned and sat aside. I checked that place after you mentioned it and found that it was not as simple as it seemed. The cultivation house, what is covered up below, should be a certain route for the hunter to sell stolen goods. I just said that most people would not dare to do this, and only those lunatics would do this. Xiu drank the potion in his hand and leaned over, but what should Yuto do now? Like you said, this kind of thing will happen sooner or later. At least it's still within my control now. But Xiu had another thought at this time. Does the principal want Yuto to grow faster? What do you want to do again? Baoba raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Xiu. Let Yuto participate in the investigation of that store. In the process, he will naturally understand the significance of Junche's work. A smile suddenly appeared on Baoba's face and he stared at Xiudao. Why don't you follow suit and grow up? It's okay, but the main reason is that I'm afraid that there will be scenes of elves being killed or injured during the investigation. It's still too cruel for people of Yuto's age. Xiu looked serious, but Baoba laughed when he heard these words. Okay, let's leave these things to our professionals. In this situation, it's not your turn. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 69. While the two were talking, two projections suddenly appeared on the floor of the studio. Xiu looked up and found that they were indeed Casey and Who Did It. You've been training hard today. Xiu walked up, took out the food that he had prepared, and then communicated with it about today's training through telepathy. During this period of time, Who Did took Casey to train. Xiu didn't know the exact training content, but Casey did seem to have changed a lot. The erratic aura gradually stabilized, and the whole feeling became more restrained. After Baoba and Who Did had a brief exchange on the other side, Who Did disappeared from the place with a teleportation, and he didn't know where he went. Then Baoba turned to Xiu and said, "Who said that's all it can do? Now that Casey's condition has basically stabilized, it depends on your own efforts." Understood. Xiu looked at Casey and nodded slowly. But Baoba was still a little worried when he saw him like this, so he casually warned. Even if it has stabilized now and there are very few superpower fluctuations, the impact is still there. You'd better not have too much contact for a long time, otherwise you will be in trouble if it causes irreversible damage. I know. Xiu turned around and nodded towards Baoba, indicating that he was clear. At the same time, he did not forget to say, "I plan to go to Zhengzin town to seek help from Dr. Oak." So fast, Baoba looked at Xiu strangely. Hearing this, Xiu could only reply with a wry smile, just like the director said, even if the impact has been reduced to the minimum, the impact is still there. Baoba understood that Xiu was referring to his grandchildren, so he didn't say anything else immediately. "Help me take care of them for a few more days. I'm going to deal with those things." Baoba paused for a moment, and the expression on his face returned to that indifference. Of course Xiu knew what Baobaba was talking about, and frowned. "I think with Yuto's character, he will definitely contact there again to seek redemption." Unexpectedly, as soon as Xiu finished speaking, Baoba looked at him with a hint of complaint in his tone. "Why else do you think I asked you to stay?" Xiu immediately reacted and knew that he was under Baoba's arrangement, so he quickly asked, "What does the director want to do?" "Get ahead of your plans for Kana and find something for Yuto to do. It's just." Xiu looked a little embarrassed and added, "Shirley's current situation is completely impossible to overcome." When Baoba heard this, he calmly took out a potion the size of his index finger and handed it over. "Let Vulpix eat this before the battle. Its abilities will be greatly enhanced within half an hour, but it will enter a period of weakness in the next period. The battle must be resolved within half an hour. Also remember not to let Shirley know." Xiu looked at the orange potion in his hand, and after thinking for a few seconds, he reached out and took it, his face a little solemn. "Clear." After the two people finished talking, they went back. In the guest room, Xiu sat blankly on a chair, staring at the surroundings as if his eyes had lost focus, and slowly rubbed the hand holding the potion. Suddenly there was a sound from the door lock, and the sound penetrated the door before anyone came in. "Please help me find out what this means." Then the door was pushed open, and Shirley walked in holding a book. The sound of kicking slippers brought Xiu back to his senses. With a clever twist of his fingers, the potion disappeared from his hand. He turned to look at the visitor and said with a hint of helplessness, "Why didn't you knock on the door?" "The door is unlocked." Shirley looked back and said casually, then quickly turned to Xiu, put the book in front of him and asked eagerly, "Why is this like this?" Okay. Xiu could only accept the book helplessly, glanced at it briefly, and then started to explain. "You have to look here first. It says here. Hurry up. Hurry up." Xiu's voice became more urgent, constantly urging the Vulpix on the field. But the movement of his hand showed no intention of stopping, and stones kept ejecting from his hand. Unlike Shirley's parallel import, Xiu's accuracy and strength are terrifying. Once hit, Vulpix will definitely suffer. It's just that the training these days has allowed Vulpix to adapt to this high-intensity rhythm. Although he is a little embarrassed, he can always avoid Xiu's attacks at the critical moment. Just the grass in the backyard was a bit pitiful, with flying turf and many burnt spots. Xiu fired the last shot. The Vulpix, which was running in a straight line, seemed to have noticed something and turned around suddenly. The next second, there was a muffled sound on the path it had just passed. "Okay. Rest," Xiu shouted, and the Vulpix gradually slowed down, but his expression was still nervous and his eyes were shaking back and forth. Shirley on the side saw this and quickly moved forward to pick up the frightened Vulpix. At the same time, she looked at Xiu and complained, "You are too cruel. What if you really hit Vulpix? If you want to make progress, you definitely need pressure. If you really grind like you do, you will never catch up with someone who started earlier than you and works harder than you." Xiu turned around and walked away, saying something casually. "You handle the follow-up for Vulpix, I'll take it out later." Taking Vulpix out for training again, Shirley's expression changed when she heard this. Xiu didn't have any unnecessary emotions. He picked up the water and took a sip. Shirley walked up to Xiu Shen with Vulpix in her arms and asked, "I can't go." "You'd better not go, it will affect our training," Xiu said expressionlessly, as if he was stating some fact. "Why can't I, as the Vulpix's trainer, participate in Vulpix's training? This is a secret, you will know it when the time comes." Xiu raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and the water glass in his hand swayed. "I'm going to go too today." Shirley looked at Xiu, eyes fixed on him. "You have things you should complete. Have you completed the homework I left for you?" Xiu's expression calmed down and turned into that cold look again. Even his words brought a bit of pressure to Shirley. "Do I have to go? Then I won't care about this. You can find a way to defeat her yourself." Sure enough, when Xiu brought this out, Shirley fell silent as if she had been silenced. Time waits for no one. Xiu put down the water glass in his hand and looked at Vulpix in Shirley's arms. "Let's go." Xiuya didn't talk nonsense, turned around and left. The originally tired Vulpix actually listened to Xiu's words, struggled to jump out of Shirley's arms, and followed after him. "What's wrong with you two? Why do you seem to be a different person? One is listless all day long, and the other is pretending to be mysterious." Shirley was a little confused when she saw this, but no one paid her any attention. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 70. It's almost time. Xiu suddenly stopped what he was doing and looked up at the sun in the sky. "Huh? Are we going to cook?" Shirley looked at Xiu in confusion. Xiu closed his eyes and pursed his lips when he heard this, and after taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes again and said, "Are you hungry? It's just right, I'll teach you how to make sweet soup, come here." I didn't want to be lazy," Shirley said hesitantly, but when she heard Xiu's last sentence, she was stunned for a moment and asked back, "What? I'll teach you how to make sweet soup?" Xiu didn't care too much about this, and turned to say seriously, "The weather is too hot, eat some sweet soup to cool down." But Shirley, who was standing next to him, restrained her expression after hearing this, and asked a little uneasily, "Is it really okay? Training is not mindless, it's good to take a break to recover." Xiu looked at Shirley, his tone was flat, "If you don't want to forget it, just continue training." "I know." At that moment, Shirley's tone was unusually firm, and there seemed to be light in her eyes. In the kitchen, Shirley was wearing an apron and fiddling with the stove, while Xiu was eating something with a small bowl. "Well, it tastes sweet enough." Xiu looked up at Shirley and told her, "Turn off the fire in about an hour, put the pot in water to cool it down, and then put it in the refrigerator. It tastes better if it's a little cold." "Got it." Shirley seemed very happy. Or she was happy as long as she didn't have to train. "I'll leave this to you. I'll go call Yudo back. Xiu put down the bowl and chopsticks, then glanced at Vulpix and turned away. Shirley looked at the empty house, and for some reason she felt empty in her heart. She could only hold Vulpix and return to the living room. After picking up the book and flipping through a few pages, she couldn't read it at all, so she threw it aside and turned on the TV to make the room sound. Time's up. Shirley turned off the fire and put the whole pot into the basin as the watch said. Looking at the sweet smell coming from the pot, Shirley murmured, "I've been watching the fire for so long, it's not too much to eat a little first." As she said that, she looked back and took the small bowl next to the pot. "Hiss hot." Slightly. Just when she was eating secretly, a familiar and disgusting voice suddenly sounded outside the door. For some reason, when Shirley heard this voice, she became extremely irritable and forgot most of what Xiu had told her. And at this time, for some reason, an inexplicable feeling arose from the bottom of her heart. She quickly reacted, put down the bowl in her hand, and then walked out. At this time, Chana had already walked in from the front door, and the EV followed behind, as if she was going back to her own home. "Where is brother Yudo?" Chana still looked like a big lady today, but she was calling Yudo when she saw Shirley. "Get out of my house now." For some reason, Shirley changed her previous avoidance and started to spray directly. This made Chana stunned for a moment and couldn't adapt. "What are you looking at? What the hell are you looking at? I knew you were here." Xiu appeared by the river with Vulpix and saw Yudo sitting on the river bank, not training with Caterpie as usual. As for the caterpillar, it was also lying beside him. Yudo looked back a little dully, and after finding that the person coming was Xiu, he responded casually. Xiu walked over and squatted next to the caterpillar, taking the opportunity to stroke the dog's head. Seeing him like this, Yudo came back to his senses a little and asked, "Why are you here?" "Shirley made sweet soup and asked me to come and tell you to go back." "Forgive me, the cake she learned from you last time was simply torture to eat." Yudo smiled bitterly when he heard this. Haha, Xiu didn't help Shirley when he heard this, but instead joined in the teasing. "Didn't you see that the headmaster's face changed after taking a bite, and quickly found an excuse to leave? No wonder you hurriedly packed it up when you saw Shirley took it out. It turns out you knew it a long time ago." Although Yudo said this, he still got up and walked back, and Xiu followed him when he saw him saying one thing and thinking another. "This time, Shirley saw that you were listless all day, so she made this specially. I won't share her love for you. You must eat a big bowl. Let me go." The two of them played all the way and soon returned to the villa area. However, as soon as they approached the front, the caterpie seemed to notice something, and its ears stood up, and the whole thing became alert. As the trainer of caterpie, Yudo naturally reacted immediately. He suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of home. He seemed to hear some sounds, and then turned to look at Xiu and said, "What's going on? What happened at home?" "I don't know. It was fine when I came out." Xiu's face also turned cold, and his expression was a little solemn. Yudo didn't ask any more questions after hearing Xiu's words, and immediately started running towards the house. Just a little closer to Yudo, he heard the sound of quarreling, but the expression on his face was a little strange at this time, because he recognized the sound. Subconsciously slowed down his pace and raised his hand to open the door. But at this time, Xiu reached out and pulled him. "Wait a minute," Xiu called Yudo in a low voice, "what are you doing? It's Kana, why are they arguing?" "Don't act rashly without knowing the situation," Xiu said, patting Yudo casually, then turned around and walked around the wall to get closer to the source of the sound. The movements were more cautious than before, and the footsteps were almost silent. Yudo also realized that he was confused, and immediately adjusted his mood and followed lightly. Going around from the front to the wall next to him, the sound of the quarrel became clearer. Xiu looked up, then turned back to look at Yudo. 2 years ago, You deliberately broke my brother's things and put the blame on me. You forgot, but I didn't. You are a bitch. So what? It's all your fault that you are stupid. If you are smarter, you won't be fooled. Don't try to deny it. I remember everything you did to bully me. You lied to my brother. I don't know how long this day has been brewing in Shirley's heart. Shiu can basically hear her voice. When she opens her mouth, it's like taking out the garbage, pulling out things from childhood to adulthood one by one, almost suppressing the other party to make a sound. And the most terrifying thing is that she can remember big and small things. Shiu suspects that she has a small notebook to record these, otherwise her memory is too terrible. Shiu turned his head and looked at Yuto, and found that he was completely dumbfounded, completely passively accepting the information from the other side of the wall. Apparently, the content of their quarrel was a bit explosive for Yuto, directly destroying and rebuilding his image of Chanel and his sister. Shiu looked up at the sky, then patted Yuto on the shoulder and whispered, "Look at it more openly." Suddenly, for some reason, the shouting and cursing from the other side of the wall became more intense, and there was also the roar of the elves.